billionaire pretended to forget her until she admitted the baby wasn't his. He woke up in a hospital pretending not to remember the woman he once loved, but when she finally confessed the truth, his heart shattered in a way no fortune could fix. Comment the city you're listening from and hit subscribe for more stories that touch the soul. Now let's begin Part 1. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. From the 30th floor of St. Augustine Medical Center in Seattle, the world outside looked like a watercolor blurred light soft gray and a quiet that made everything feel unreal. Ethan Hale opened his eyes to that silence. The machines beside him hummed softly, steady, and rhythmic. His head throbbed. His throat was dry. For a few seconds he didn't know where he was. Then it came back piece by piece. The crash, the headlights, the sound of metal twisting against metal. He heard a chair move and turned his head slowly. A woman sat beside his bed, her hair tied in a loose bun, eyes red from crying, but still steady. "Ethan," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "You're awake." He looked at her, his face blank. His pulse monitor beeped once louder. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone low, uncertain. "Do I know you?" Her lips parted. "It's me, Clara." She waited for a flicker of recognition that never came. He blinked slowly. "Clara," he repeated as if testing a foreign word. "I'm sorry, I don't." The nurse stepped in explaining something about head trauma and temporary memory loss. Clara nodded mechanically, but her face told another story. Shock, confusion, fear. Ethan turned his eyes toward the window, hiding the storm behind them. Because the truth was, he remembered everything. The accident had changed many things, but not his memory. His mind was sharp, and so was his suspicion. Before the crash, whispers had reached him that Clara, the woman he'd planned to marry, had only stayed because of his fortune, his name, his empire. And when the brakes of his car failed that night, something in him snapped. So when he woke up, he made a choice, a cruel, careful choice. He would pretend. He wanted to know who she really was without the weight of his name between them. He wanted to see if she loved him, not the billionaire, not the brand. "Clara," he said again, forcing a distant politeness. "I'm sorry. I wish I could remember." She smiled or tried to. Her hands trembled as she reached for his. "That's okay," she said softly. "You will. I'll help you." He didn't pull away, but inside guilt and curiosity tangled like vines. When she stepped out to talk with the doctor, Ethan stared at his reflection in the glass partition beside him. The face looking back was pale bruised, but alive. He didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because of memory loss, but because he'd become someone he didn't want to admit. Existed a man who trusted no one, not even the woman who once whispered, "I love you," against his shoulder. The rain outside thickened. Somewhere down the hall, the nurse's shoes clicked against the tile floor. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and money-old wealth-cleaned surfaces, expensive silence. When Clara returned, she carried a small cup of tea and a trembling hope. "You always liked chamomile," she said, placing it by his bed. He nodded slightly, eyes calm but unreadable. "Thank you." She sat beside him again, hesitant, her fingers brushing the edge of his blanket. "You scared me," she whispered. "I thought I lost you." Ethan watched her carefully. Every word, every pause, every tear. He wanted to believe her, but suspicion had already built a wall inside him. Still something about her voice, soft but certain, pulled at the part of him that wasn't made of armor. When she finally drifted off in the chair, exhaustion overtaking her, he kept staring at her sleeping face. She looked nothing like the woman the tabloids had described, the manipulative social climber, the gold digger, the liar. Maybe they were wrong, or maybe she was just good at pretending too. He leaned back, slowly closing his eyes. Rain tapped against the window like a metronome for his thoughts. He had started a lie to find the truth. But as the night deepened and the city blurred into lights and silence, Ethan Hale had no idea that this lie would soon cost him more than he ever planned to risk. The rain hadn't stopped in Seattle. It whispered against the windows of Ethan's penthouse like a secret the city refused to tell. 2 weeks had passed since he'd woken up. His recovery had been quick, too quick for someone supposedly fighting memory loss. But no one questioned it. Money had a way of smoothing the edges of doubt. Clara stayed. She was there in the mornings making coffee he never drank. She was there in the evenings sitting by his side while he read the same page of a book over and over, pretending to struggle with words he knew by heart. Ethan played his role well, calm, forgetful, curious, the perfect patient. But every night when the house fell silent, his mind refused to rest. He replayed every detail, every word she said, searching for cracks in her truth. He told himself it was necessary, that this lie was a test, a final audit of the heart. But the more he watched her, the harder it became to breathe around the guilt. That afternoon, Clara sat on the couch near the tall windows, sunlight falling over her face like a soft filter. She was on the phone, speaking quietly, unaware that he could hear her. Her voice was low-tired. "I can't tell him yet," she said. "He's barely sleeping as it is. If he finds out now, it'll break him all over again." A pause. Then a small sob. "I know he deserves the truth, Mia, but not now. Not when he's this fragile." Ethan's chest tightened. The truth? What truth? He'd thought the worst, that maybe she was hiding an affair, that she was still here for his money. But hearing her talk like that, afraid of hurting him, didn't fit the image he'd built in his head. When she ended the call, he quickly shifted, pretending to look out the window. Clara turned and smiled faintly. "You're quiet today." He returned the smile, keeping his voice even. "Guess I'm still trying to piece things together." She walked over, sitting beside him. "I can help," she offered, "if you want me to." He nodded, but didn't speak. Her closeness felt too heavy. The warmth of her hand on his sleeve was a reminder of everything he used to trust and everything he'd broken by pretending not to remember. That night, after she went to bed in the guest room down the hall, Ethan wandered into his office. The city glowed beneath him, lights scattered like embers across the wet streets. On his desk sat a framed photo him and Clara at the company's charity gala last year. She was laughing, her head tilted toward him. He was looking at her, not the camera. Back then, it had been simple. They'd been planning their wedding, building a life, until the rumors started, until a few friends told him that Clara only said yes because of the Hale name. He hadn't believed it at first, but the idea grew like a crack in glass, spreading slowly until it shattered everything. And now, here he was, hiding behind a lie, hoping it would somehow make him feel safe again. The next morning, Clara came into the kitchen with her hair still damp from a shower. She wore one of his old sweatshirt sleeves, too long for her arms. The sight of it caught him off guard. She poured orange juice into a glass and handed it to him. "You used to drink this every morning before meetings," she said with a small smile. "Used to," he repeated quietly. Her smile faded. "Do you remember anything about us?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Flashes maybe, feelings more than images." She looked down. "That's okay. Feelings are a good start." Her optimism hurt more than her silence ever could. Later that day, he overheard her speaking to Dr. Lang, the family physician who visited once a week. "His vitals are stable," the doctor said, "but his memory should have improved by now. Sometimes the mind protects itself by not remembering." Clara bit her lip. Maybe he doesn't want to. Ethan closed his eyes, standing just out of sight. For the first time, he wondered if he was the one hiding, not her. That night, she came into his room carrying a book. "You couldn't sleep before the accident," she said softly. "I used to read to you. It helped." She sat down, opened the little prints, and began reading aloud. Her voice filled the space, gentle, steady, full of something he couldn't name. He watched her through half-closed eyes. Every line, every pause. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book slowly and whispered, "I don't know if you can hear me, Ethan, but I believe you're still in there somewhere." He froze. Her voice lowered. "Whatever happens, I just want you to know I didn't stay for your money. I stayed because once you made me feel seen. And I can't walk away from that, even if you never remember." She turned off the lamp and left quietly. Ethan lay still in the dark, his heart pounding. For the first time, his lie didn't feel like control. It felt like punishment. The city hummed below, alive and indifferent. The rain had stopped, but inside, something heavier began to fall. When dawn came, Clara found him awake, sitting by the window with a mug of untouched coffee. She smiled softly. "Couldn't sleep." He didn't answer. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, he forgot which one of them was pretending anymore. Seattle had a strange way of holding on to the rain. Even when the sky cleared, the city still smelled of water and concrete, like the world had just finished crying. It had been almost a month since Ethan Hale lost his memory. The lie had settled into routine. Mornings with polite smiles, afternoons filled with silence, nights with Clara reading by his bedside, her voice calm, her hope unshaken. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple rebuilding what life had broken. But to Ethan, every glance, every word still felt like an experiment. He told himself he needed proof that she loved him, not the empire he'd built. But lately, the truth felt less like something to find and more like something he was afraid to face. That morning, Clara brought him breakfast on a tray, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee that smelled too strong for someone pretending to forget. "You always like them this way," she said, setting it on his lap. Ethan smiled faintly. "You seem to know a lot about me." Her brows lifted. "I should. I was going to marry you." He paused fork in midair. "You were." The hurt in her eyes flickered fast, almost invisible. "Yeah," she said quietly. "You don't remember the proposal." He forced a small frown, pretending to think. "No, sorry." She looked down, trying to hide the disappointment, but he saw it. It hit him harder than he expected. Later that day, he walked with her through the penthouse balcony overlooking downtown Seattle. The wind was cold, sharp with sea air. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, leaning against the railing. "Maybe I shouldn't go back to work. Maybe I should sell my shares in the company and start over." Clara blinked, startled. "Sell everything. The hotels. The foundation. Why?" He shrugged. "If I can't remember who I was, maybe it's time to find out who I could be." She studied him, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, the money doesn't make you who you are. You built those hotels because you cared about people, your employees, the guests. You were never just rich. You were kind." He looked at her, searching for any sign of calculation, but there was none. Just honesty, plain and quiet. Her answer should have comforted him. Instead, it made the lie sitting between them feel heavier. That night she made pasta and turned on the old record player in the corner of the living room. A soft jazz melody filled the air, something familiar, though he pretended it wasn't. She poured him a glass of water, then one for herself. "You used to hate eating alone," she said, sitting across from him. Said food tasted better with conversation. He smiled faintly. "And what did we talk about?" "Everything," she said. "And nothing." Sometimes that was enough. For the first time since the accident, they laughed. Really laughed. It felt natural, like muscle memory neither of them could unlearn. When the laughter faded, she leaned back in her chair. "You know you're still you," she said softly, "even if you don't remember. I see it every time you smile." Her words lodged somewhere deep inside him. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he remembered every smile, every night, every fight, but he couldn't. Not yet. Not when he still didn't understand what she was hiding. Later, he found her on the balcony again, staring out into the city. Her phone was pressed to her ear. "I'll tell him soon," she whispered. "He deserves to know, but I need to find the right way." A long pause, then softer. "No, it's not about the money. You know that. I can't lose him again." Ethan froze in the hallway, heart pounding. Again. The word echoed. When she hung up, he slipped back to the couch, pretending to read a magazine. She came inside moments later, her face pale. "Everything okay?" he asked casually. She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just my sister." He didn't press her. He'd learned that silence could reveal more than questions ever could. That night, the storm returned. The sound of rain against glass felt like déjà vu. Clara knocked softly on his door, holding a folded blanket. "You're probably cold," she said. "You always were, even with the heater on." He took it from her, their fingers brushing for a second too long. "Clara," he said quietly, "why do you stay?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You don't owe me anything. You could have left, started over. But you didn't." She hesitated. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "Because I made a promise," she said simply. "Not just to you, to myself. That if I ever had a second chance to do things right, I'd take it." He wanted to ask what she meant, what second chance she was talking about. But before he could, she whispered goodnight and slipped away down the hall. He sat there in the dark for a long time, the blanket still in his hands. The storm outside rumbled like a heartbeat. His test had started with suspicion, but now it felt like a trap, one he'd built for himself. The next morning, she was already up humming softly as she made breakfast. Her hand rested absently on her stomach as she stirred the eggs. Ethan froze in the doorway. He hadn't really noticed before, but now, under the thin fabric of her sweater, he could see the gentle curve of her belly. A dozen thoughts collided in his head: fear, confusion, realization. She turned, catching his stare. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I guess I should have told you sooner," she said, placing a hand over her stomach. "It's not new, but it's part of why I stayed." Ethan's voice caught. "Clara, what are you saying?" Her answer was quiet trembling. "I'll explain everything. Just not yet." Outside, the rain started again, washing the city clean, while leaving everything else exactly as it was: messy, human, and heartbreakingly unfinished. Ethan turned away from the window, realizing that the test he'd designed to expose her had just exposed him. By the time November settled over Seattle, the city had turned into a watercolor of fog and glass. Rain streaked down high-rise windows and made the world look softer than it really was. Inside Ethan Hale's penthouse, everything felt quieter than usual. Too quiet. He sat by the window, watching headlights smear across the wet streets far below. Clara was in the guest room, or at least he thought she was. She'd been distant lately, as if carrying a weight she couldn't name. He'd seen it in the way her hands lingered over her stomach, in the way she stared at nothing for too long. Ethan told himself this distance was good. The plan was working. The longer he pretended not to remember, the more truth she'd eventually reveal. But lately, the word truth had started to sound less like victory and more like a threat. That night, a storm rolled in from the sound. Wind rattled the glass, thunder cracked in the distance. Ethan was halfway through, pretending to read, when the bedroom door creaked open. Clara stood there, soaked from the rain hair clinging to her face. She must have gone out, he hadn't even noticed. "Where were you?" he asked, startled. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes looked red like she'd been crying for hours. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Ethan set the book aside. "Clara, what's going on?" She walked in slowly, trembling, holding something in her hand, a small silver ring he hadn't seen since before the accident. "I found this in the box you gave me last Christmas," she whispered. "The one you said was for our future." He nodded, cautious. "Okay." Her breath caught. "You gave it to me the night before the crash. You said, 'Now there's no more secrets between us.'" Ethan's throat tightened. He could still remember that night perfectly, the way she'd cried when he proposed, the way he'd thought she was crying from joy. Now, seeing her standing there, drenched and shaking, he knew better. "Clara," he said carefully, "you're scaring me." She let out a fragile laugh. "You should be scared. I've been scared every day since that night." Thunder rolled outside. The lights flickered. Then she said it. "The baby, it's not yours." The world went silent. Ethan's pulse crashed against his ribs. His mind refused to process the words. "What did you say?" She stepped closer, tears streaming down her face. "You heard me. The baby isn't yours." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then whose is it?" She shook her head, sobbing. "It doesn't matter. It was one mistake. One night when I thought I'd lost you forever." He stared at her eyes wide. "Lost me, Clara? What are you talking about?" She took a shaky breath. "You were gone for weeks before the crash. You shut me out. You wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't come home. I thought it was over. I thought you were done with me." "I was working," he said, voice breaking. "I was fixing everything for us." Her words came faster now, spilling like the rain outside. "I know. But I didn't know then. And when you came back, when you proposed, I wanted to tell you the truth. I swear I did. But then the accident happened, and the doctor said you might not wake up. And suddenly," she stopped breathing hard. "I told myself I'd tell you when you were stronger, when it wouldn't destroy you. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. And now you look at me like you don't even know who I am, and maybe you don't. Maybe you shouldn't." Ethan's hands were shaking. He stood pacing toward the window, the storm raging beyond the glass. "So everything we had," he said slowly, "was built on a lie." Clara flinched. "No, what we had was real. What I did was wrong. I won't defend it." He turned to face her, voice trembling. "Then why stay Clara? Why pretend? Why sit here and read to me and act like nothing ever happened?" Her answer was quiet but steady. "Because I loved you before I hurt you. And I didn't know how to stop." The words hit him harder than the thunder. He stared at her, this woman who had built her own prison out of guilt, and realized how much of his own had been made out of pride. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain pressed against the glass like a heartbeat. Then Ethan said, "You should go." Clara's eyes widened. "What?" "Just for now," he said. "You need space." "And I." His voice cracked. "I need to think." She nodded, slow numb. "I'll pack a few things." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Clara, did you ever love me, or was I just—" She looked back, tears glistening under the dim light. "I never stopped." Then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her, but the echo stayed. Ethan sank onto the couch, head in his hands. For the first time since the accident, he didn't care about the lie he'd built. His plan had backfired in the cruelest way possible. He'd wanted to test her love. Instead, she'd handed him a truth that broke him. Lightning flashed outside, and in that split second he saw his reflection in the window, pale, hollow, unfamiliar. He whispered to no one, "What have I done?" Hours passed. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The penthouse felt emptier than it ever had before. On the table beside him, Clara's book lay open to a page she'd marked weeks ago. The Little Prince. The line she'd read aloud still echoed in his mind. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. He picked up the ring she'd left behind, turning it between his fingers. The metal was cold, almost sharp against his skin. For the first time, Ethan understood the irony of his own deception. He'd pretended to lose his memory to find truth, and in doing so, he'd lost something far more precious. When dawn came, the storm had moved on. The city outside shimmered, washed clean, but not fixed. Ethan stood by the window, the skyline reflected beside him. In the glass, he saw both versions of himself, the man before the accident and the man after. He didn't know which one Clara had loved or which one she'd betrayed, but for the first time, he wasn't sure it mattered. The sun broke through the clouds, a thin band of gold over the horizon. He whispered her name once softly, Clara. No answer, only the echo of a woman who'd confessed her truth while he was still living a lie. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the guilt and the pride, something in him finally cracked open. Seattle was gray again the next morning, quiet, washed out, and heavy with the kind of stillness that follows after a storm. The penthouse felt empty without Clara. Her absence had a sound. It wasn't silence exactly, it was the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the echo of a voice that wasn't there anymore. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd spent the night pacing between the window and the couch, watching the city lights fade into morning. Her confession replayed in his head on a loop, each word sharper than the one before. The baby isn't yours. He'd thought he was prepared for betrayal. He'd built his entire life on the assumption that people wanted something from him, his name, his money, his power. But hearing it from her lips had undone something inside him that logic couldn't reach. Still, the cruelest part wasn't her lie. It was his. He was the one who'd started this game, the one who'd looked into her eyes and pretended not to know her. Now she was gone, and the only person he could blame was himself. By noon, Ethan was in his car driving aimlessly through downtown. The city moved around him, buses hissing through puddles, people crossing streets with umbrellas tilted like shields, but none of it felt real. He ended up at the waterfront where ferries pulled in and out through the fog. He parked near Pier 62, turned off the engine, and let the sound of the rain fill the silence. He remembered bringing Clara here once, long before the lies, when things were still simple. She'd leaned over the railing and said the water made her feel small in the best way. He'd laughed, then told her she wasn't small at all, that she was the only person who could make him feel seen. The memory hurt now. He pulled out his phone thumb, hovering over her number. But what would he say? I forgive you. I'm sorry I was never really sick. Every version sounded like a confession wrapped in cowardice. That afternoon, his oldest friend, Mark Turner, showed up unannounced. Mark had been with him since college, one of the few people who didn't treat Ethan like a headline. You look awful, Mark said as he stepped inside. What happened? Ethan forced a bitter laugh. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. Ethan poured 2 cups of black coffee and sat down. Clara's gone, he said finally. And I'm the reason. Mark frowned. You mean the accident? Ethan shook his head. No, I mean me. I lied. I've been lying since the moment I woke up in that hospital. He told him everything, how he'd pretended to lose his memory, how he'd wanted to test her love, how he'd watched her every move, waiting for proof of betrayal. When he finished, Mark just stared at him. You've always been smart, Ethan, he said quietly, but this might be the dumbest thing you've ever done. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I figured that out last night. What are you going to do now? I don't know. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. She's pregnant, Mark, and it's not mine. But I can't even be angry, not after what I did. Mark leaned forward. Then stop thinking about who's right. Think about who's hurting. The words hung there heavier than the rain outside. By evening, Ethan was back at the penthouse. The air felt colder. He noticed the little things Clara had left behind, a mug by the sink, a sweater draped over a chair, the scent of chamomile tea still faint in the air. On the coffee table sat the book she'd been reading to him, The Little Prince. He picked it up, running his fingers over the worn spine. A folded piece of paper fell from between the pages. It was a note written in her handwriting. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to tell you everything. I never meant to hurt you. You were the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered, and that's exactly why I stayed too long. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace, even if it's not with me. He sat there for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. When the rain finally stopped, he drove again this time, knowing exactly where he was going. The train station at King Street. He found her sitting alone on one of the benches, a small suitcase by her feet. The platform lights flickered above her, painting her face in pale gold. She looked up when she saw him. Surprise, then exhaustion. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He swallowed hard. "I could ask you the same thing." "I'm leaving," she said simply. "It's better for both of us." "Better?" His voice cracked. "Running away is better." She looked down. "You deserve peace, and I can't give it to you." He took a step closer. "Peace doesn't exist without you." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You don't mean that." "Yes, I do." He paused, his voice lower now. "Because I lied too." Clara's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I never lost my memory," he confessed. The words felt like glass leaving his throat. "I remembered everything. The proposal, the accident, the fight before it. All of it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. You pretended." He nodded slowly. "I wanted to know if you loved me for me. I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was destroy what was real." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ethan, why would you, Because I was scared," he said softly. "Scared that if you didn't love me, I wouldn't survive it. But now I know what's worse, losing you because of my own pride." Clara stared at him for a long moment, then looked away, wiping her face. "You can't fix this with apologies." "I'm not trying to fix it," he said. "I'm trying to be honest for once." A voice announced the next departure over the loudspeaker. The sound filled the space between them. Ethan stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat. "You think I can forget you that easily?" She met his eyes. "You already did." He took her hand gently. "Then let me remember you right this time." The train lights appeared at the end of the tunnel, bright and blinding. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. Something in her expression softened. When the train finally stopped, she didn't move. Not yet. And for the first time since the accident, neither of them was pretending anymore. The winter air bit against Ethan's skin as he stood on the platform watching the train's headlights disappear into the fog. Clara hadn't boarded. For a moment, that was enough. Neither of them spoke as they walked back to the parking lot, the sound of their shoes echoing against wet concrete. When they reached his car, she hesitated. "You don't have to drive me anywhere," she said softly. "I know," he replied, opening the door for her anyway. "But I need to." The drive was quiet. Seattle's skyline glowed in the distance, cold and distant, like a memory that refused to fade. Clara looked out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Ethan kept his eyes on the road hands, tight on the steering wheel. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words kept dying before they reached his lips. When they finally reached her apartment, she didn't move right away. Her hand hovered on the door handle, unsure. "Why'd you come after me, Ethan?" she asked. He turned to her, voice low. "Because I couldn't let the last thing between us be a lie." She met his eyes. "There's already been too many." He nodded, taking the hit without flinching. "You're right, but I can start fixing that. Not with promises, with truth." Clara studied him for a long moment before finally opening the door. "Good night, Ethan." "Clara?" She stopped, half turned toward him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything I made you feel, for making you carry this alone." Her eyes softened just slightly, but she still shook her head. "Go home, Ethan." Then she closed the door. For days after they didn't see each other, Ethan tried to go back to his old routines, board meetings, endless calls, contracts, but none of it felt real. Every time he saw his reflection in the glass walls of Hale International, he saw a man who had all the power in the world, but couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. He started visiting the waterfront again, sitting by the railing where they'd once watched the ferries. The air smelled like salt and rain, and sometimes he'd swear he could still hear her voice in the wind. One afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was Mark. "You planning on moping forever?" his friend asked. Ethan exhaled. "Maybe." Mark sighed. "You're not the only one who's miserable, you know." She left her job at the clinic, moved to a little place outside the city. Where, Ethan asked before he could stop himself. "Oregon coast. Cannon Beach, I think." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then thanks. 2 days later, he was there. The drive south was long and gray, the kind that gives you too much time to think. He found her cottage near the cliffs, small white with a wraparound porch and wind chimes that sang when the ocean breathed. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, but not angry, just tired. "I didn't expect you," she said. "I didn't expect me either," he admitted. She stepped aside. "You should come in before the wind knocks you over." The inside was cozy and simple soft blankets, books stacked everywhere, a small fire burning in the hearth. The sound of waves filled the quiet between them. Ethan looked around, then back at her. "You always wanted to live near the ocean." Clara nodded, folding her arms. "I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't remind me of everything." He nodded slowly. "I understand. They stood there, the silence stretching. Finally, he said, "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I had to tell you something." She waited. "I never loved you because you were perfect," he said. "I loved you because you were real, because you made me forget the noise. And I can't undo what I did, but I can be the man you thought I was before I broke it." Clara blinked fast, tears gathering. "Ethan, I don't even know who you are anymore." "Neither do I," he said quietly, "but maybe we could figure it out together." She shook her head, looking away. "It's not that easy." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not asking for easy." For a moment, only the sound of the fire filled the room. Then slowly she sat down on the couch. He stayed standing, waiting. Finally, she spoke. "You know, when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I thought about leaving town, starting over. But then I remembered the way you used to look at me like I was home. And I thought maybe if you ever woke up, I could still give you something good in all this mess." Ethan knelt in front of her, his voice almost a whisper. "You already did." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You gave me the truth, even when it hurt." He took her hand carefully like it might vanish. "Clara, I don't care who the father is. I care about who I am when I'm with you. That's the man I want to remember." Tears slid down her cheeks, and this time she didn't pull away. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and rain through the open window. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan," she said quietly. "I know," he said, squeezing her hand. "That's why I'm staying." They sat together for a long time, saying nothing. The fire popped softly. Waves rolled against the shore. When she finally leaned her head against his shoulder, it wasn't forgiveness. It was something quieter, something closer to peace. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling her heartbeat against his. In that moment, the world wasn't divided between lies and truths anymore. It was just two people, both broken, both trying to start over. Later that night, as the storm returned and thunder echoed across the coast, Clara whispered, "Maybe it's not too late." Ethan smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "For us. For everything." He turned to her, brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then we'll start small, one day at a time." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the ocean for a heartbeat. Wild, unpredictable, and beautiful. Inside the cottage, two people finally stopped pretending and began to breathe again. 1 year later, the ocean still sounded the same steady, endless forgiving. Ethan Hale stood on the porch of the little cottage on the Oregon coast, watching the morning sun rise over the waves. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, and somewhere behind him came the soft sound of laughter, Clara's voice followed by a smaller one that still made his heart stop every time he heard it. The baby, a boy named Noah, was learning to walk. His steps were clumsy and determined the way all beginnings were. Ethan turned just in time to see Clara catch their son before he tumbled into a basket of laundry. She laughed breathless, and for a moment it felt like the world had rewound itself to something simpler. He walked inside, leaning against the doorway. "You two are a mess," he teased. Clara smiled without looking up. "You love this mess." He grinned. "Yeah, I do." Later that afternoon, after Noah fell asleep, they sat outside with mugs of coffee, the ocean stretching wide before them. Clara glanced at him. "You ever think about Seattle?" "Every day," he said honestly, "but not the way I used to." "How's the company?" I stepped back, he said. "Mark runs most of it now. I started something new instead, a foundation." Her eyebrows lifted. "A foundation?" He nodded. "For families who can't afford long-term care, for people who need a second chance to rebuild their lives." Her eyes softened. "You mean for people like us?" He smiled. "Exactly." They sat in silence for a while, watching the tide roll in. The air was warm, the sky pale gold. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, her old silver ring polished and shining again. Clara stared at it, her breath catching. "Ethan." He took her hand, his voice gentle. This time, no promises, no pretending, just two people who got lost and somehow found their way back. She smiled through tears. "That sounds like a promise anyway." "Maybe," he said, "but it's one I can keep." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. The wind rustled through the chimes above the porch, and the sound felt like the world whispering yes. That evening, the sky burned orange and pink as they walked along the shore, Noah in Clara's arms. The waves shimmered at their feet, pulling and retreating like breath. Ethan looked out at the horizon where the water met the fading light. "You ever think about what would have happened if we'd never made it through?" he asked quietly. Clara followed his gaze. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I think about everything we would have missed." He nodded, smiling faintly. I used to think love was something to control, something to test. But now, she looked up at him. Now what? Now I think love is something you have to believe in even when it doesn't make sense. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. It never made sense, she said softly. That's how I knew it was real. They stood there until the sun slipped below the horizon, the waves turning dark blue beneath the fading sky. No grand gestures, no perfect endings, just peace. Back at the cottage, as they tucked Noah into bed, Clara looked at Ethan and smiled. Do you think people can really change? She asked. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I think people can learn to choose differently. That's close enough. She kissed his cheek. You chose me. I'll keep choosing you, he said quietly. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the ocean through the open window, and in that little house by the sea, two people who had once built their lives on lies were finally learning what truth sounded like, soft, steady, and beautifully human. Sometimes love doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with forgiveness. Sometimes it's not about who's right or wrong, but who chooses to stay when everything falls apart. And maybe that's what makes love real, not the fairy tale, but the fight to begin again.